Welcome to Shree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. I am thrilled to be guest hosting today, and we have a great team here. Steve Taylor and Julia Weeks are helping to produce today's show, and we have Deven Parekh, who's going to be our guest, and we'll bring him on in just a moment. But as you're watching this, and in particular for people who are watching on replay, if you've come to Facebook or LinkedIn, thank you for watching the show. We do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Sree is the host of the show. He's been doing this for about 4 years. I'm the executive producer and occasional guest host. And you can always find us live regardless of where Sree is, where I am. We'll always have a New York Times read along. So let us know where you're watching from, and make sure to hit share. Jonathan Borstein is already logged in, watching from the East Village, and he already registered for a social media weekend. Jonathan, thank you for that. We will certainly be talking about social media weekend in just a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and check out the stream on Facebook and LinkedIn. And I'm going to share it real quick. But I think even before we get going, we have a surprise guest with us. And just in time for my mom to say hi from Jamnagar. Emily Margaret Parekh is saying hi. So why don't we go ahead? First of all, that's Grandma saying hi from Jamnagar. Can you say hi to everyone?
Hi, everyone.
And why don't we go ahead and bring in our guest, Deven Parekh, and I'll get the background off the screen. Deven, want to say hi to your goddaughter?
Hey, Emily, how are you?
Emily, you don't need to do that. I'll take put the speakers on so you can hear, because I have it going into my ear right now. Okay, if you can say hi again, Deven, that'd be great.
Emily, you look a little tired.
I am a little tired.
Are you tired?
Well, I think we can put you to sleep here if you want.
Oh, we're not going to put her to sleep. Why don't you not sit on my leg? So Emily often, every now and then, she'll come and say hi during the read along. We have Deborah Kerr saying hi from South Florida, and a host of the Super Bowl. We'll be talking about the Super Bowl a little bit later, of course. Pradnya is joining us from Silver Spring, Maryland. Ron Thomas, who was a guest in January, is joining us from Dubai. Deven, have you been to Dubai?
I have once.
You have once?
Yeah.
We have
the best air conditioning in the world.
Best air conditioning. We have Deborah Kerr is asking about the Girl Scout cookie sales, Emily. Deborah ordered some. Deven ordered some. A lot of people ordered cookies from you, didn't they? And let's see who else. Mark Lee is joining us from Durham, North Carolina. And Sree is joining as well. Real Sree, when he is not hosting, to make sure folks know who it is. So thank you, Sree, for joining us. And yes, we get to see 3 Parekhs. But Emily, you want to show everyone your teeth? Open your mouth. She lost 2 teeth last week.
And I feel one growing in over here.
We have Diane Stefani joining us from Margate, New Jersey, and Donato from Eastchester, New York. And Deven agrees about air conditioning in Dubai. PK Sharma is joining from Riverdale. So a number of people, please make sure to hit share. And I'm going to do that as well. Emily, I need you to move just a little bit. I'm going to log into my tablet. Deven, if you haven't done that already, if you can go ahead and share on Facebook and LinkedIn. So your friends can watch. We'll hit share real quick. And let's see. And post. And we'll also find it on LinkedIn as well. Let's see, go there. Look for the, there we go. These are just some of the things that we like to do when we start the show. And it's done. So go ahead. More folks are checking in. Vincent Souza from Chennai just got off a fabulous. Come on. If you want to stay, you can stay, okay? But Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't be silly. Emily's very good at being silly. So we have a number of people. Remember to hit share. Let us know where you're watching from. And so let's go ahead and get into the conversation with Deven. Before we jump into the paper, Deven, can you tell us a little bit about your work? You are a managing director at Insight Partners. You've been there for a number of years. You are a venture capitalist. What exactly do you do?
I've been there since January of 2000. So it's 20 years now. And Insight is a investor in software companies globally. And basically, we are trying to find the most interesting software companies anywhere in the world and provide them the capital to grow across. And we can talk more about some of those companies. And we invest both in enterprise software companies, the companies that sell primarily to businesses, as well as consumer companies. We were an early investor in Twitter, so a name that people would know. The vast majority of the companies we invest in, most people would not have heard of. They're providing business applications. And over time, we work with the management team to scale their business. And eventually, they either go public or they're acquired. And we make a return for our investors. And our investors are kind of large institutional investors, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and that no different than what a large alternative asset manager would typically have. So we're basically a money manager on behalf of institutions investing their tech allocation.
And so what you mentioned Twitter, what are some of the other companies that you've invested in or that have been bought out by companies we would know?
Well, I think the names you're more likely going to be familiar with are the consumer names like, in China, which we'll get to later, I assume, is a JD.com, Alibaba, which consumer names. In this, in this country, we've done a lot in consumer on the food side. So we're investors in a company called HelloFresh. A lot of people are familiar with HelloFresh, and Blue Apron is the delivery kits that people get in order to cook. We're the largest investor in HelloFresh. Delivery Hero, which is a global company that does food delivery pretty much everywhere in the world, primarily Asia and other places in the world. And then if you were to go to the enterprise side or the business side of what we do, again, most of the companies that we invest in are not companies that would be particularly well known unless somebody worked in a data center or we're actually a buyer of software for the enterprise. So, but examples of things would be, for example, we used to be investors in a company called Turnitin, which is the largest global provider of anti-plagiarism software used pretty much by every major global university and the nemesis of students around the world. We're investors in companies that are large providers of data to oil and gas companies. We're providers of software companies that sell to convenience store chains. And, the larger kind of macro trend is that, I think Mark Andreessen said 20 years ago that software is eating the world. And
Mark Andreessen, the founder of Netscape, right?
Founder of Netscape and founder of a venture capital fund called Andreessen Horowitz on the West Coast. And in today's world, I think it's easy to forget how dominant software is. People woke up this morning maybe off their alarm on their iPhone, which is totally powered by software. They might have asked Alexa the weather. That's software. They probably went to bed last night watching Netflix. That's software. They're logging into this platform. We're using a software platform called StreamYard in order to do this. After the show, they might go get some cash at the ATM machine. That's software. They might have booked a application. They might have booked a gym class through an app. That's software. And obviously, when you go to the office every day, even though today is a Sunday, people are using software all day long. And so the macro trend is the percentage of time that people are consuming software in a day has increased dramatically and will continue to increase dramatically. And we're basically finding the best companies in each one of those segments, both consumer and enterprise, and helping those businesses get to scale.
And by way of background, and I want to bring Sharon's comment back on the screen in terms of referring to Emily and reminding everyone to have fun. We introduced the show and referenced that Emily is your goddaughter. For folks who don't know, and if you don't see the family resemblance, Deven is my cousin. He is, we grew up together outside New York, and it was an honor to have you and Pam's elder cousin be Emily's godparents when she was born. So this is very much a family affair this morning, with Emily being on screen for just a little bit. She may make another appearance when she's a little less tired. And we've actually had her read the poem one day. We end the show with reading the weekly poem in the New York Times Magazine, and so she did a pretty good job of that. And she actually does an imitation of me doing the read along, which is kind of interesting.
That's probably more fun.
A lot more fun than the poem. We have another number of other people who have joined us. Our neighbor Rochelle from Hastings is joining us. We have Stephen Kaplan, who was a guest back in December. A great event we did at the Museum of the City of New York. Have you been there, Deven?
I have been there. It's a great museum.
It is a great museum. And we're actually doing.
It's not that well known. It's not well known, but I recommend people go.
It's not that well known, but we're hoping we'll help raise more awareness about that. Stefan actually has several photographs on in their permanent exhibit and on display. But coming up in March, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later in the show, we have a event called Social Media Weekend, which is going to be March 21st in New York at Pace University. The registration link is at the bottom of your screen, and the social media handles as well. On the Friday before that, we're actually going to be doing a museum crawl, and we're hoping to go through the Museum of the City of New York and the Met, taking people along and doing some social media from there as well. We'll cover more Social Media Weekend later in the show, but I just want to make sure that people have that. And Jonathan Borstein actually started his very first comment when he joined the show was saying that he had already registered for Social Media Weekend. So I definitely encourage others to follow suit. So with that, why don't we go ahead and start talking about some of what's in the paper, because there's a lot of great articles to cover, and some great background as well to talk about. The very first article, and I'm going to switch to my phone. So this is the setup that we have here. I use the laptop, and Deven mentioned StreamYard. If anyone's interested in StreamYard, let me know. We've been using StreamYard for about a month now. It's a great way to bring on remote guests. We can have multiple people on the screen. We can show pictures and video during the live stream as well. And one of the things that it allows me to do is switch between the laptop that I'm using and my cell phone, so I can show the newspaper. So I'm going to do that right now, and take care of some of the audio before we make the switch. And let's see, quick audio check. Deven, you can hear me? And
yep, I can hear you, no problem.
Deven?
Yes, I can hear you.
You can hear me, great.
Yeah.
So the front page actually has a really important story, and for folks to understand how the paper is set up, the lead story is in the top right corner. And if you can see it, it's about the impeachment trial, a story about Donald Trump first tainted, then set free by the Senate, and it's a news analysis. But the display story is about China, and you can see the dominant picture, a 5-column picture. China kept world in the dark as outbreak rippled.
And there's also a lot of coverage about how airlines are halting flights to China. There are quarantines, people who have been evacuated coming back from China. And there's some coverage I saw about people who are trying to do business who need to be there in person, this is affecting their bottom line. What are your thoughts on the coronavirus and China travel, that whole mix?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is escalated very, very quickly. People remember, I think it was about 20 years ago that there was SARS, and there was a lot of there was a lot of news coverage around SARS, but we never kind of got to this point as quickly as we have here. And I think part of the reason is, well, both viruses are thought to have come from transmission from animals to humans. After SARS, China had actually tried to further regulate some of the wild food markets that exist there, but the enforcement around it was weak, and so that's where they believe in Wuhan, obviously, where this happened. I think that one of the bigger differences, at least appears to be, between SARS and the coronavirus is kind of the effective viral coefficient is a lot higher, and one of the reasons it appears to be a lot higher is because you don't actually have to have symptoms in order to be infectious. And obviously there's two problems with that. One, if you have symptoms, you tend to try to self isolate or make an effort that you might not otherwise make, and as well as the people kind of around you. And that's, I think, led to a much higher average infection rate. I think they're talking about for each person who has a virus, they can infect between 2.5 and 3 people. And kind of when you run the models on that, you kind of get relatively high, you get very high infection rates very, very quickly. And I think that I was surprised by the speed at which, so I was less surprised that they were quarantining people from Wuhan. What's in today's paper is they're really talking about this people coming in from mainland China who are not permanent residents of the U.S. It doesn't matter anywhere in China. And then now if you look at the announcements by the major airlines, they're pretty much talking about shutting down all flights to China for the next 2 months. And I think, the supply chains, we are their largest trading partner. And there is and I was in Asia 3 times last year.
I was going to ask about that.
So, I mean, I've traveled to China many times, been to Hong Kong many times, been to Taiwan many times. And there's an incredible amount of business travel, some of which, for example, in what I do, I can certainly I can have a conference call with an investor, without necessarily attending. But when you're talking about,
you don't need to be there.
Well, I mean, I think, as is always the case, I think people think, the conversation I always have with my wife, Monica, is like, well, why do you have to go to these meetings? Why can't you just do a conference call? And of course, there's still a very important part of business, which is human relationships and kind of building relationships. And so need is a relative thing. Can you have a conversation like we're having today on video conference? Yes, but I think it's harder to build the relationship. It's harder to go have the dinner and build that personal relationship, which is important. So I don't think that I or most people can run their business without ever traveling and having direct interactions. The bigger challenge is the actual manufacturing supply chain, right? So it's one thing to not be able to travel to go check on my factory. It's another thing for the factory to be closed, right? We have one company that is software business, but there's a hardware component to what they do. They source the sensors from China for people. The factory that manufactures the sensors has about 1,000 employees. 4 of them were infected with the coronavirus, and the factory was shut down. So, if the factory comes back online in 2 or 3 weeks, it'll be fine. But if the factory is shut for 3 or 4 months, that creates a significant problem, because that supply chain has to be recreated somewhere else, and it's probably difficult to recreate it in China, and then you have to go to a third place, and that's just not easy to do quickly. So I think what's very unclear, sorry for the long-winded answer, is the long-term economic implications of this are very, very hard to predict.
And that's one of the challenges, I think, that you can't predict. Not being able to go there for a week, maybe okay, 2 weeks, but if it comes months, if it becomes a 6-month thing.
Well, American Airlines has already said there are no flights till the end of March, right? So that's a couple months. That's a long time. I was surprised that some of the airlines. I wasn't surprised that they said no flights for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then we'll reevaluate. But some of them already said 2 months. And I think in many cases, I don't know if you saw this. This might not have been in today's paper, might have been yesterday's paper, but in many cases, the pilots unions and the flight attendant unions are putting a lot of pressure on the airlines as well, obviously, because they're concerned about their employees.
We have our friend Ron Thomas, spends a lot of time in Asia, in East Asia. He's going to be going to Shanghai in mid-April.
Ron hopes he's going to Shanghai. I think it depends on whether the flights are back. As of right now, if most of the airlines are talking about mid to end of March, but I think this is going to wait a wait and see, and see what happens.
And Mark is asking, how similar this is to Ebola.
Look, I'm
not a medical.
I'm not a doctor, but I wouldn't want to answer the question. I think one of the things that I think that the WHO is particularly worried about is, and one of the challenges with something like an Ebola is actually where the virus spreads to. So if I were to get coronavirus and I was admitted to NYU Langone, odds are, unless I was severely immunocompromised in some other way, I'd be fine. But if the coronavirus ends up in Africa, where you don't have the same level of medical facilities, it becomes a much, much bigger problem. So one of the challenges with some of these viruses is not only what the fatality rate is, because the fatality rate is often very dependent on, or the mortality rate is often very dependent on where it actually goes. And so I think that's one of the challenges with some of these conditions is it's not just that the virus can spread easily. It's that if it spreads easily in places with high population density that don't have the ability to provide medical care at the same way that many of the people on the phone might have access to it, it becomes a much, much bigger problem.
And as you see on the screen, my mom is making a comment about how this will impact exports and trade between countries. She specifically referenced India and China and cotton in particular.
Yeah, I think it's going to be. I think it's pretty much, if you think about it, the U.S. supply chain, as well as other global supply chains, are so integrated, into China right now that it's complicated.
Sure. You mentioned NYU Langone in passing. You're on the board there. It's a health system in New York.
It's a health system in New York. Yes.
Several hospitals?
Oh yeah, I think they have a facility, obviously, in Manhattan, but they also now have a facility in Long Island, and they also have a facility in Brooklyn. Many of the outer borough facilities have happened through kind of acquisition. And NYU Langone has been unbelievable turnaround story. And I was not part of the turnaround. I joined relatively recently, but it's run by a guy named Robert Grossman, who's a doctor himself. But he's one of those unique individuals who is renowned in his own field, but actually brought a level of discipline while increasing quality of care that's pretty much been unprecedented. And actually, a book's been written on the NYU Langone turnaround, and I actually sent that book to all the CEOs of my businesses. I think some of them were wondering why I was sending them a book about a hospital. And what I said was, the book's not really about the hospital. It's about how you can improve operational efficiency and improve quality and improve customer experience, all at the same time. And
Sure.
NYU Langone is a great example of that.
Sure. So there are a couple of other stories in the paper that we want to talk about, and I'm flipping the camera back around. And a quick shout out to Julia Weeks, who is producing for us on Facebook. Paula Kiger said hi real quickly. See if I can find her hello to the group. Paula has been our partner in this effort for at least a year, if not longer. And she was unavailable this weekend, but stopped by anyway to say hi. So Paula, thank you for all of the work that you've done. And Julia, thank you for stepping in today. Julia shared a link to NYU Langone while we were talking, Deven. And that's part of what we do is, that why we have producers in Facebook and LinkedIn to add links to what you're talking about, your social handles, add context, links to the articles, etc. We always say whenever you do a live stream, you always need a producer on the back end to support the show. And the way that we've organized it, we actually have 3 people supporting Sree when he hosts. I'm managing StreamYard. We have 1 person in Facebook, 1 person in LinkedIn.
The book I was referring to is called, it's by Bill Haseltine, and it's called World Class, A Story of Adversity, Transformation, and Success at NYU Langone Health. And it's an interesting book.
Great. Julia and Steve, maybe you can find it and share the links to that book. I wanted to jump in and we're going to jump around a little bit today because there's some specific topics we want to cover. And I'm here's looking at the inside. There's more on the coronavirus, a graph on how bad the virus will get and what they expect in terms of the spread of the virus. Some good graphics, some good details. I want to turn our attention to electoral politics. The campaign in the U.S., the Democratic nomination. There's an article about Jill Biden supporting former vice president, campaigning for him. There's a good article about the Iowa caucus and how a winner will be named, going into some detail about how each media outlet will determine the winner. There's also, and I'm looking for it here, I don't see it here, this headline, critical poll is shelled after flaw is reported.
The article that you went by as it relates to how the Iowa results will be reported.
Let's go back there.
I think that's a kind of a particularly interesting story, and I think something that people aren't really focusing on. Historically, the only thing that's been reported out is kind of what they call, I think, state equivalent delegates, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how that's the only thing that's publicly reported, and therefore the only metric that people have, the press has to report on. Those who don't know how an Iowa caucus works, it's kind of a very, very complicated process where people actually just show up to a room. They end up having to spend 3 to 5 hours in order to participate. So it's not.
Have you been out there for a caucus?
I've been to Iowa during the caucus. Was not actually in the caucus room. I was volunteering.
Mm-hmm.
And originally was going to go. I was actually originally going to be there tomorrow for the caucuses, but now have a board meeting in DC, so I can't be there. But the people show up in a room, they have their first choice candidate, and just imagine a gym in a high school, and you go to the corner where your candidate's people are. Now, in order to be what's called viable, in order for those votes to count, you need to be at least 15% of all the votes in that precinct. If you're not, you're considered not viable. And you then have to pick your second choice candidate and go to that place. And you have to go to a place where at least 15%, the people represent at least 15%. For the first time, they're going to be releasing first choice candidate, second choice candidate, and then effectively the delegate totals. And the result of that is that you could end up with way too much information, and every campaign trying to spin their quote unquote win in a different way. And I think the New York Times made, in this case, a wise judgment, which is to say, we're just going to report it the way we reported it historically. But it's more complicated here because, I think you have a chance of, you have a lot more candidates in this race, and at least the most recent polling has been pretty tight. And so there's a very reasonable probability that coming out of Iowa, while there will be a winner, probably, if there will be a winner of Iowa, they may not be at the same spread as there's been in kind of historical races. And so it might be very unclear going into New Hampshire.
And I'm pulling on the screen some pictures. A little bit about what you speak in terms of politics. You've been involved for a number of years in various campaigns.
It was, and Obama, Obama was obviously, Iowa was basically, that's Obama with my grandmother, who's since passed away. Probably the happiest moment of her life. That scarf that he's wearing, she knit for him.
Sure.
And he put it on. This was in 2016 with Hillary. This was during the presidency at Vice President Biden's house for a Christmas party.
That's your mom?
That's my mom. Yes, that's my mom. Yes.
As Tim Kaine.
As a campaign during the Hillary campaign, Tim was obviously the vice presidential nominee during that race. And this is with Mayor Pete, who I've supported and done a few events for. This is at my office.
Sure. So what can you say? I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the screen. Give me 1 second to do that. And we should be good with audio.
Yep.
Deven, with that background, talk a little bit about the role of money in politics.
Yeah, and I think there's a opinion piece. The editorial board had a piece, I think it's called "More Money, More Problems for Democracy."
Today's paper?
Yeah, today's paper.
Great.
It's the editorial board.
We'll go to it.
It's an opinion piece, but look, Citizens United, which Citizens United, which I know is a Supreme Court ruling that many people are familiar with, really kind of made it possible for there to be an amount of money in politics that's, I don't want to say it's unprecedented, but it is unprecedented before Citizens United. And, like my personal view is, if there was a way to have public financing of campaigns with limits, that would probably be the best system. It would then be a fixed amount of money, and it becomes a battle of ideas. The challenge is in the system that we're living in today, no side, neither the Democrats or the Republicans, are going to unilaterally disarm. And I think in this piece, they talk about this dinner that one of the Trump super PACs had hosted that I think Lev Parnas actually videotaped, which, it's unbelievable to me that people are in these dinners videotaping them. But he did.
Have you ever been videotaped at a dinner where you didn't think you would be?
Not that I know of. Now, maybe I've been videotaped and I didn't know it was being videotaped.
But you would think these high-end dinners, there would be, you'd be off the record. The donors would know. No one's going to take out a camera and film, right?
It's highly unusual. You certainly see people take pictures, like selfies or pictures where it's very clear what you're doing, but the thought that you'd have your camera out and be videotaping is pretty surprising to me, regardless of who it is or what the event is. Point being, and I think they use this example. Look, I'm sure there's been other events that are like this. Maybe there've been other events like this on both sides. This one we happen to know the details of because it's been videotaped. But there's a level of commercialism around that dinner that if you're sitting there watching that video, people are troubled by, and understandably, because a president's time or a senator's time is a pretty scarce commodity, and having access to that time solely because you're able to write a large check, is troubling to people, understandably. I don't know how we get to that system. I don't know how we get to a public financed system. I think it's very hard for everybody likes to talk about it. But at the end of the day, everybody believes they can probably drive a financial advantage at some point. And that financial advantage could frankly be, what you're seeing with being able to raise money for super PACs. But that financial advantage obviously can also be something like Michael Bloomberg, who's self-financing, right? Mm-hmm. And there are those who would say, well, he would make the argument credibly that, well, because I'm self-financing, I'm not subject to any moneyed interest who's going to try to corrupt me. I'm only going to be focused on my agenda. And there are those who would say, well, that's great, but you also might not be listening to your view becomes the only view that's important. And maybe that's not good for democracy either. And it's hard to say which argument is correct. But I do personally believe right now that we do have too much money in politics right now. And, certainly I've been involved in fundraising for candidates before, and nothing would make me happier than to be disrupted, as a quote unquote bundler, and have ideas be what we're talking about.
So just quickly checking in with our friends on LinkedIn. And I know, Deven, you said you might be trying to watch on two screens.
I have the New York Times open right now on my iPad. So yeah.
No, that's good. Yeah. We have people from Pennsylvania, Zurich, here in New York, Atlanta, Charlotte, Chennai, and Eastchester watching on LinkedIn.
Oh, it's definitely, you've got a global audience.
Definitely a global audience. And if folks are watching on LinkedIn, Steve Taylor will flag comments for us rather. Monica, Deven needs coffee. Monica. I'd like to have fun on the show as well, Deven. It's not all serious.
Well, we had Emily before, so
we have Emily. If Monica wants to make a cameo,
I don't think she wants to make a cameo.
No, neither does Pam. Don't worry. I've got the camera angled just right, so when she goes to the fridge, she won't be seen. But for folks watching on LinkedIn, if you do have comments, Steve Taylor will send them to me, and I'll do my best to get them on the screen so that Deven can answer them. So moving on, one of the other things that we want to talk about, and this is an important topic, we shared it in the Twitter thread that we built over the course of the week, is about MS and the search for a cure and a cause. Now, one of the things I want to ask people to do, if you know of somebody who has MS, at whatever stage of the disease, we don't want to necessarily call anyone out. We don't necessarily want to name anyone, but if you can add it in the comments, just say that I know someone with MS, because I know that several people do, and I'm actually going to reach to Facebook as well. I know several people. Deven, I know you do too. Some people that are close to us.
Yep.
Can you talk about your work with the Tisch Research Center?
Yeah, both Monique and I are on the board of the Tisch MS Center, which is based in New York, and it's run by Dr. Siddiq. And Dr. Siddiq really started He's probably one of the largest private practices around MS. It's an independent practice, so not directly affiliated with a hospital. And he's also has built when I decided that I wanted to figure out what I was going to do, I kind of went to some people who work with not-for-profits and said, hey, I want to, it's kind of a bit of a funny story of how I got to the Tisch MS Center. I went to a consultant, kind of a not-for-profit consultant, said, I'm interested in supporting research in MS. Can you give me the list of organizations that you think are credible in this area? And she gave me a list, and I did my own research. And the Tisch MS Center is the one that seemed the most interesting to me. And I sent a letter. I sent an email to Dr. Siddiq saying I wanted to meet and I was interested in potentially supporting their work. And I didn't get a response, which I found kind of surprising, because you would think that if you offer somebody the support, that they might want to take a meeting. And he didn't respond. I then wrote a letter and I faxed it to him. I don't know why I thought that faxing a letter would fax.
When was this?
This was 5 years ago. I sent a fax, which is kind of funny. He had a fax machine. They had a fax number, so I faxed it to him. And his office called and set up a meeting. And I went to go see him. He's a workaholic, so I think we set a meeting for 7 p.m. after work. He was still there. And I said, Dr. Siddiq, I have to ask you, I sent you an email and you never responded. I may have to send you a letter by fax in order to get a response. He said, to be honest with you, Deven, nobody sends me cold emails offering me money. It's just not very common. And you're not a patient. Nobody that you know is a patient, and that's normally how people get to me. Anyways, that's how we first met. And for those who don't know, basically MS is a disease which which the immune system eats away at the protective covering of nerves, right? Which affects disruption, which then affects the communication between the brain and the body. Kind of oversimplifying, but that's kind of the fundamental. And the challenge is nobody really. There's lots of theories, but nobody really knows the cause, and there's not really a cure. And so all of the current pharmacology is to halt the progression or to reverse certain symptoms, but there's not really a cure. And so what Dr. Siddiq is focused on, and what his team is focused on, is really to both try to find the cause, because it's almost impossible to find a cure for something without knowing what the cause is. But at the same time, kind of looking at novel therapies using things like stem cells. And he's one of the few FDA certified facilities to do stem cell research around this topic, to help basically for patients who've gotten to a much more progressive point in the disease, to be able to hopefully reverse some of the symptoms. And there's been some interesting research that they've done on this. Obviously, you have to look at animal models as well. And so it's interesting work. It's the problem with these types of things is you don't know how long it's going to take. But he's got a great team of scientists. They're based in Manhattan. I think one of the reasons I like working with him is he's an optimist. He believes he's gonna find the answer.
I don't know if you saw, I was flashing comments on the screen when you first started talking.
Yeah, I saw some people know. I saw some of the comments.
Just to show how widespread it is, our friends Julia Weeks, Sunny Slaughter, who was a guest on our show back in August when we talked about the 1619 project. She also was thanking you for your insights. In addition to knowing someone with MS, Jonathan Borstein as well, Carla Baranakis, another former guest, former staffer with the New York Times, Diane Stefani, Mark Lee, and then on LinkedIn, a number of people shared as well. So I'm going to scroll back. let's see who else. So Steve Taylor, Donato Vaccaro as well, and so a few others. So it really is just talks about how prevalent this is. But thank you for your work, and you and Monica have done a lot of work with the annual gala that they do.
Yeah, it's our most significant. The organization's most significant kind of fundraising event a year is a gala, which obviously everybody who lives in New York knows that New York is gala central. But I think we work very hard to put an event on that raises a lot of money in one night, and we work very, very hard to minimize the cost of the event so that we can kind of maximize the proceeds to the cause. Sure.
And also Lance Raymond, also from LinkedIn, sharing that they know someone with MS. One of the things I want to switch gears a little bit, and it'd be great if we could add to this section. I want to jump to the I quit section, which I think is really interesting, and it'd be able to great to be able to say at some point I quit MS, that we quit MS, right? The long-term goal. So let's go ahead and switch that up again.
And so we'll have the audio through the phone again. This is a special section which is really interesting. The way the New York Times manages their online and print sections. These stories went online, I think January 20th, a whole package of, and I've seen 19 now in print. So it's 19 or 20 stories of people who quit relationships, jobs, their religion, even this assignment. They had a reporter that was working on a story who ended up ghosting the editor, just didn't respond to repeated queries. But this is this is the full page spread. This is a special section in terms of a print section. As I said, available online as well. A whole range of different things that people have quit from their cell phone, cigarettes, New York City, on-demand laundry, Yale. Someone quit sex for 12 years, quit cars. Steve Gorman was with the Black Crowes. He quit the band. They have a piece about Marianne Williamson quitting the presidential campaign.
Well, we have a lot of those. We have a lot of people who quit the presidential campaign.
A lot of people have quit the presidential campaign so far, absolutely. And if our friend Tim McDonald is watching, and I'll look for comments, I know that he recently quit his job. I think this week is going to be his last day on the job. So, and before I want to recognize Sonny Slaughter's comment about the work on MS, and my mom as well. Thanks for the work on MS, and very proud of you. And Deborah Bernick is also saying that the New York Stem Cell Foundation is doing cutting edge work on MS. But as far as quitting is concerned, there are a couple stories I think that you were able to read beforehand. I'm curious about your thoughts, Deven. Have you ever quit anything?
It's funny because I actually, as I was looking at this section, my thought was I make my living backing people who don't quit. And, if you think about entrepreneurship, you're generally doing something that people told you is probably not possible. That's too hard. And you jump into it. Entrepreneurs jump into it. I'm not talking about myself right now. And I think that every entrepreneur has had multiple times where they feel like they want to quit. But the ones who succeed are the ones who don't. And so I was reading through this section going, right, I actually have to make my money with people who don't quit. Have I ever quit anything? I think like a lot of people, I say I'm going to quit things, and then I can't really stick with it, right? So I did have a year, I think over 18 months maybe, where I quit carbs. And
that would count.
So that, well, it's 18 months. I always think of I quit as having more permanence associated with it. And the question as to whether or not I've quit something permanently, I really can't think of something I've quit permanently. But I, like everybody, have had things that I've quit for periods of time. And yeah, I think there's obviously there's a lot of books that have been written on habits and how difficult it is to change habits. But what I try to teach my kids, which is hard to do, is that there's always going to be a reason to quit something, and I know this is a different context of what this is talking about. In many cases, we're quitting bad things, smoking, and I'm certainly not encouraging my kids to not quit bad things. But I think that it's I looked at this a little bit more philosophically, which is I feel like where I've been successful oftentimes has been because I refused to quit, and that when I look around me at people who've been successful, it's people who have refused to quit. So I looked at it very differently than maybe other people might have looked at this.
Sure. Well, our friend Jonathan Borstein, talked about how the Quitting New York article reminded him of an older essay by Joan Didion about leaving New York. Right? Yep. So I think if you take a broader view of quitting, you can see how it might apply. Carla Baranakis had worked at the New York Times. She quit there in 2009, helped by a voluntary buyout. So it certainly is a form of quitting.
I've certainly changed jobs. So I've
sure.
Each time I change jobs, I quit a job.
There you go.
So right. Carla's comment is reminding me that I guess I have quit. I didn't get a voluntary buyout unlike her.
Sure. I'm curious. For people watching, I'd be curious to hear about their experience with quitting, and again, this broader sense of stopping doing something, right? Not necessarily. I mean, quitting. There's some famous quits out there where the airline flight attendant made some announcement on the intercom and then jumped out the chute. Right, that type of thing, or on social media. I remember there was someone who worked for a politician in England, took over the social media accounts, railed against their boss, and then said, "I quit." I mean, there's some famous examples like that. Ron Thomas has quit numerous jobs. Carla Baranakis says she didn't have another job when she took the buyout. On LinkedIn, Kathleen Kiley, I will say, loved your comment that you're backing people who don't quit. But keeping it related to your work, Deven, I'm curious, as a venture capitalist, at some point, you're investing in entrepreneurs and in possibilities. At some point, it's not working out, and you walk away from something, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, we're more growth stage investors than early stage investors. So we're typically not backing a company at the very, very, very early stages. And at that stage, your failure rate or extinction rate is significantly higher than the rate than at the growth stage.
Sure.
So what we end up more is with companies that don't scale, right? We thought they were going to continue to grow, but at some point they hit a wall. And quitting there is kind of recognizing that it's probably not going to scale, and that we have to make a tough decision to sell the company or get to another outcome, which is likely not going to have met our expectations, but where it just becomes the right decision because you acknowledge that whatever your initial premise in the deal was for some set of circumstances not working out.
Sure. Several people are sharing their experiences with quitting. Sunny Slaughter said that she quit a job to become the boss. That's certainly not a bad.
That sounds like an upgrade.
An upgrade. Ron Thomas talked about never being afraid, and Carla made a reference to the song "Take This Job and Shove It." Sunny has quit states, Alabama and New Jersey. Won't ever live there again, and she's a Jersey girl apparently. And Jonathan Vorstein is sharing a interesting rule of thumb. It's better to leave too soon than to leave late, right?
Yeah.
I think this is certainly a phenomenon, and it's just a question of how you manage it and what you do. And the other thing around the work world, you always talk about not burning any bridges when you leave somewhere, because you never know when you're going to cross paths with someone again, either on the way up or the way down, your career or theirs. But I thought this was a good section. And just to flip through again, since we like to focus on the layout and the design, the graphics they use for quitting a job or quitting Yale, dating, someone quit the church that they grew up in, right? Their phone, not sure how that would be possible. Imagine quitting software. That would be really just going off the grid. Quitting the priesthood, buying things, cars. And they went with the 2-page spread inside was someone quitting their skincare routine, showing a whole number.
Well,
that probably
just saved them a lot of money.
Yeah. This is Marianne Williamson's piece on the presidential campaign. This thing about quitting smoking, and Steve Gorman quitting the band, the Black Crowes. Here's an interesting one: I quit giving a damn, and that's a good approach. And there's a hashtag DGAF that people use, which I won't spell out for folks. DG, you can figure out what AF might mean. Quit dating apps, laundry service, chewing gum, and this one at the end, quitting this assignment. So they actually showed.
Neil, I think you got feedback, Neil.
Let's see. Not sure why. Interesting. Okay, it's still there, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see here. We've got it on mute, the speaker off, and so that's a little better. I wonder if it's just a question of the headphones. The assignment, the editor actually shared emails they had sent to a reporter that was going to work on one of the stories. Hello, just a friendly check-in with date stamps as well. December 17, friendly check-in. I'm trying to have as much in hand as possible by Friday, since everything will go so quiet for the next 2 weeks. Sorry to be that person. 2 days later, and if you need some extra time, tomorrow is not make or break. January 5th, hi, checking in. It's not too late. And January 9th, is it pathetic? I'm still holding out hope that this essay will happen. That's Anya Stresmian, who's the deputy editor in the Styles department, not giving up hope on one of her folks. Here are a couple other comments on the section. Let's see. We have some people. Let's go back. So my mom is saying sometimes people can't quit due to insecurity and they need the paycheck, certainly, for the job. Rose Horowitz, who is great on social media. She actually started a social media campaign, Women to Follow. Deven, I'd certainly encourage you to check that out. Check out that hashtag. Over 1,500 people that they've identified so far, which was a movement initially by some reporters to make sure that they were getting a diverse set of voices. But
she said, when my children want to try a new activity, we sign them up, and the rules that they had to finish the course or season. When her daughter was sick, they signed up for Jack and the Beanstalk. She didn't realize that it was an audition. She thought it was just something else, so she let her quit the course. And Sunny is saying that that's a great section. And yes, Joanna noted that last article at the end. Deborah tried buying used books, but she hasn't succeeded yet. That's definitely a challenge. Let's see. And Stefan is commenting on the idea of not burning bridges. And Andrew Lee, who's a good friend, close friend of Shree's, lives here in the DC area. I think you're right. The default should be to take the high road. There may be unusual occasions where you need to speak truth to power, however, when talking about quitting. And I think that there was a comment from LinkedIn as well. A couple of comments. Mara Kelly said, I quit a job to travel the world and then took on multiple diverse projects. Kathleen Kiley quit a magazine job, very freeing, and then landed a great job somewhere else.
Neil, I think it might be time to quit this section.
You think we should quit the section?
Yeah.
Samantha quit. Well, I want to end with shout out to Samantha for sharing that she quit alcohol and is 11 years sober. So
that's great.
Congratulations.
She wins the quit award.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to transition from that. So again, for folks, we're covering the New York Times. This is the Sunday New York Times read along. Let's go to the business section, Deven. This is something I know that you're very familiar with, and you had some thoughts on the Payless and private equity. How private equity buried Payless. A failed shoe chain shows why finance-driven capitalism hasn't delivered. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot of, talk about private equity. I read that article, and, I think the interesting thing about that article, and I think there's some valid criticisms of private equity. The flip side is I think they also become a pretty easy target.
What you do is considered private equity in terms of
venture
capitalism?
A portion of our business goes everywhere from venture capital to growth equity to private equity. Private equity, I think when most people think about private equity, they think about the use of leverage and leverage buyouts. And that's about a third of our business. And about 2/3 of our business is kind of growth equity, where we're using no leverage. And so some of the things that you read about in that Payless article, for those who read it, are less relevant. So I was going to answer this question not so much in the context of insight, just more in the context of the overall criticisms of private equity. When you read that article, certainly the fact that the company had leverage made it more difficult. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the retail industry over the last 20 years, it's come under a tremendous amount of pressure. And because of things like online, right? So I'm guessing that people who are listening to this show 10 years ago probably never bought a shoe online, and now probably almost everybody who's listening has at least bought a pair of shoes online, whether that be through Zappos or something else. And just like people are buying everything else online. And so a lot of Payless's challenges were challenges that existed because the nature of the economy and the nature and basis of competition has changed really dramatically. And they made some bad business decisions as it relates to how to deal with that competition. And so I think the article makes it sound like the headline, which is how private equity buried Payless, makes it sound like all of Payless's problems. By the way, I'm not an investor in Payless. I've never been to Payless. So my comment is based on having just read the article. It makes it sound like Payless's demise was all driven by private equity, when the reality is probably a very, very large portion of his demise was based on the fact that competition changed, that they didn't respond to it effectively. Now, it's true that its demise was hastened by the fact that the company was leveraged. But I don't think it would be fair to say that the company went under purely because of private equity. It's just there's so many industries, take things like coal, or take industries that are under a significant amount of pressure because of trends. You have lots of companies that, a lot of retailers, think about mom and pop retailers in every town that everybody who's watching this show is listening to, that have gone out of business, that had nothing to do with private equity. It had to do with the fact that the retail climate changed. And so my only comment is, I think that oftentimes, which is, again, I'm not being an apologist and saying that every private equity firm makes great decisions, but I think that it's become a little too easy to blame business failure just because a company happens to be owned by private equity, as opposed to looking at the underlying business decisions they made and determining whether or not the decisions were sound.
The graphic certainly accompanying the article, and you can see how it dominates the front page of the business section. 6 suits carrying a $9.99 what looks like a woman's shoe. Can't tell if there's a heel or not, but yeah, it certainly looks like they took it to the grave, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what else, when you look at the paper, Deven, what else do you look at? What do you start with when you open the paper?
I mean, I always start with section A1. And I still actually get the paper in paper.
The print edition.
The print edition of the New York Times, and that's a funny story in of itself. I was at a dinner with Monica. This goes back 4 or 5 years ago, and happened to be at a table that Sulzberger was at, and I just mentioned that we still get the print edition of the New York Times, and he kind of asked, well, why? And I said, well, I kind of like reading it that way, and Monica likes doing the crossword puzzle on paper, and he walked over and kissed Monica's hand and said, one subscriber at a time. So it was funny. It was cute and funny story. But I think the reason I still get I don't have today's paper in the New York Times because we're a house in Long Island and the paper goes to New York. So I have yesterday's paper, and today's paper in the actual paper version. But the reason I like reading the paper is because of something that I think is just increasingly missed in all of our lives, which is serendipity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our lives, our kids' lives, everything's planned. When we're leaving, what we're doing, what's scheduled, classes, this, that. Obviously, my days are highly scheduled, and reading the newspapers for me is one of the few things that's I still have serendipity associated with it, meaning you're flipping through and you end up reading an article about something that you had no idea you were going to read an article about. And so I try to, when I'm flipping through the newspapers, always find things that are, I'm Twitter a lot. So the big news I tend to be up to speed on before I even get to the paper. And so what I enjoy is flipping and finding the thing that is unusual or that I didn't know anything about. And that's why I get the paper version, because I find it that you don't get that same experience. At least I don't feel like I get that same experience reading it online.
Which is why we do the New York Times read along every Sunday. It really is a celebration of print, celebration of the New York Times. But what we try and do is to bring the print edition to a broader audience. A number of people have actually subscribed to the paper after watching the read along, so that they can share in that experience.
Well, the New York Times would then be paying you a sponsorship.
We're going to be approaching them with your help, with your connections with Sulzberger. You can put in a good word for us. We've had, the endorsement that we've gotten from the New York Times, having the print editor, Tom Jolly, have us at his home and doing a session from his kitchen table last August. Mm-hmm. And then he's been a great source of information and encouragement over the last year, letting us know about special sessions. We did a tour of the printing press in College Point with New York Times. In January, I was up in New York, and we had the travel editor, Amy Vership. When on the day that the New York Times 52 Places appeared in print, she was on the New York Times read along to talk about the list and we had Sebastian Modak, last year's Traveler, on the show as well. So it's been a great relationship. A number of reporters and editors, Katie Rossman, Neil Genslinger, Monica Drake several times, Kevin McKenna, business editor. Their support has been great. And so we try and mix up the guests, not just journalists from other papers, obviously several authors, other folks as well. I was going to, going off your comment about serendipity, I don't know that I would have seen the article about Brad Pitt and the beauty trap if I was looking online or searching my regular sections. But this is a whole article about how, his, bearing his chest in Thelma and Louise in 1991 has led to him being undervalued as an actor for the last 20 plus years, which I think is really interesting. Is that the kind of article that you would have?
I mean, probably wasn't an article I would have naturally read, but I mean, the underlying, basically what they're saying is that, Brad Pitt got objectified. And I find it a little amusing that they picked when this is something that I feel like women actresses suffer from to a much greater degree.
Sure.
So yes, the fact that a man was objectified becomes the front page of Arts and Leisure.
Well, and not just front page, but I think that, again, when you're looking at the design and the layout, doing this cover image in reverse, with the Statue of David-esque type thing of Brad Pitt, it really does stand out. They really did get people's attention with it. Speaking of arts and leisure and the theater, you're involved in a production of Monsoon Wedding, right?
Yeah, we're trying to get it. We are, Monique and I have helped fund Mira Nair, who's the original
Mira Nair, yeah.
The original producer and director of the movie Monsoon Wedding, which I always liked. Wanted to bring it to Broadway. Now it's the first time. It's the first time we've done. It's the first time we've done anything with Broadway, so I didn't know much about. I didn't really know much about this at all, and it's a much more difficult process than I ever would have expected. We were kind of assuming and hoping that, I think we've been at it for like a year and a half. I would have expected the show would already have been here. Now it's played in California at the Berkeley Repertoire. It's going to be playing in London this summer, and the hope is after that we can kind of get it to Broadway. The reality is there's a lot of competition, and the cost of putting these productions on is incredibly high. And honestly, venture capital is easier than picking a Broadway show.
Wait, venture capital is easier than picking a Broadway show?
I think venture capital is easier than picking a Broadway show.
Okay.
And because it's actually very, very hard, kind of probably no different than in movies or other areas. It's just, just because you might be passionate about something doesn't mean that other people are going to be passionate about it and kind of want to watch it. But I think for those who haven't seen the movie, I think it's a great feel-good movie. Monsoon Wedding, the music's fantastic, and I think eventually we will get it here.
As a reminder, for folks who may have joined us midstream, our guest is Deven Parekh. He is the managing director at Insight Partners, a venture capitalist. But as we're hearing, he is also involved in producing a show that hopes to make it to Broadway, has been involved in supporting the Tisch MS Research Center, has been involved in politics, some great insights on business as well. You can follow him on Facebook and Instagram at dparekh, Twitter, DJ Parekh, LinkedIn at DE Parekh.
I think that LinkedIn might be wrong.
We can double check. That's what I saw this morning when I checked it.
Yeah, I must admit I use LinkedIn not as much as I use the rest, though I've been starting to use it more recently. But I don't recognize that one. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
I will. Yeah, that's what it is, Deven.
Okay. All right.
You might want to go in and update the.
I better come up with a better LinkedIn.
The custom limp.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have Neil Parekh on all channels, and I have the rest of our production team as well, Steve Taylor and Julia Weeks. For LinkedIn, I'm Neil Parekh 1 because I was, I guess, a little late claiming my account on LinkedIn. Sometimes you need to either have a unique name, a really unique name, or get there early. So there are a couple of other things. Let's see. And Julia found an article about Monsoon Wedding in Playbill. So thank you, Julia. And this is why we have a producer doing this on the back end.
So those of you who are going to be in London in July should definitely go see the show.
London in July. Absolutely. Let's see what else. So if folks are not familiar, I encourage you to join Sree's closed Facebook group, Sree's Advanced Social Media. You can find that on Facebook just by typing in Sree's Advanced Social Media. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure we cover is Social Media Weekend. We talked about that earlier a little bit. I'm going to go to the screen and just walk through a few more details. And we'll also put let's see here, get back to present. And I'll load that. And what we'll do is we'll also put the information on the bottom of the screen so people can see it. So Social Media Weekend is a conference that Sree and other colleagues have organized for a number of years. This year it's going to be March 20th and 21st. The main activities on Saturday the 21st. 30 world-class speakers, training on top platforms, headshots, something we call social media doctors. I'll actually be leading a session on live streaming, particularly talking about StreamYard and the work we've been doing with the New York Times Read Along. We have testimonials from people like Walt Mossberg, Lauren Mack, Gianni Riotta, who is a journalist from Italy. We have previous speakers that included Craig Newmark, Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, April Rain, who started the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite several years ago, Ali Veshi as well. I don't know if you've ever, I know you're on CNBC quite often on Squawk Box, right, Deven?
Oh yeah, they're in Bloomberg and a few other.
MSNBC as well.
I've not been on MS. I've not been on MSNBC. I mean, generally, I'm on as it relates to business and
business.
Yeah.
So I mentioned that we're going to be looking at going to some of the top museums on Friday with an opening reception, Friday night reception at Muckrack. And then most of the workshops and presentations are going to be on Saturday. And we're also looking for sponsors. So if folks are interested, please visit the website. It's you can get it readalong.link, SM Weekend 2020. You can also follow it on Twitter and Instagram. And we will look forward to having folks join us. There are a number of people on the show who are involved in planning the conference or who have been to the conference in the past. I know that Stefan and others had some great comments earlier. So I want to encourage people to check that out. We have a question from Carla that I want to put on the screen. And I'll take the banner off and give Deven a chance to read this. How important to you in your work is it to stay on top of the news? What kind of news in particular, and how do you guard against fake news?
Good question, Carla. For me, I think it's incredible. Well, I view it as incredibly important, not just in my work, but I happen to think it's just incredibly important as a citizen to be on top of the news. Because my observation and what I think one of the challenges that we have right now, in our democracy is that we're not debating facts. and that's not a partisan comment. I think there's facts there's fake news on the left, and there's fake news on the right. I think there's fake news everywhere. And I think that it's very, very important to try to actually get to the facts, so that what we're really debating is whether it be a policy or whether it be a person, we're debating on a common set of facts. And it relates to work. It's important just because obviously I have to stay up to speed in the business world. I have to stay up to, particularly in the technology world. And then because of some of my outside interests around politics and the Carnegie and some of the other things I'm involved in, staying very up to speed on foreign affairs and is important kind of as well. I think how do you guard against fake news? Probably one of my main sources of news is I get the Wall Street Journal, I get the New York Times, I get the Financial Times every day, and then Twitter is probably my biggest source of news. And I think the important thing with Twitter is, which I think a lot of people make the mistake of seeing a tweet and basically ending there, right? You see the salacious comment on the tweet, and you stop there. And again, I don't think this only applies to call it the right. This applies to the left as well. And so for me, I can't tell you I do it 100% of the time, because we don't always have the time. But if it's something that I think is particularly interesting, or something that I might use in a conversation, context, interview, board meeting, I click through to see what the source is, right? And I don't want to suggest that I have a perfect filter for great sources, but I know of sources both on the left and the right that I don't view as particularly credible. And I'm much less likely to not use that fact or want to confirm that fact a different way. The problem is that if you kind of think about, in my view, if you look at the next generation, like my kids, Emily, they're likely not going to be getting paper subscriptions to the New York Times. They're much more likely to be getting their news from Snapchat's news channel, Twitter, Facebook articles, Instagram, and I think, and there's a much less of a tendency to click.
And whatever social platform is,
and whatever social platform exists
10 years from now.
Yeah, 5 or 10 years from now. And I do believe that these social media platforms have more of a responsibility than they're kind of claiming, as it relates to not necessarily being editorial. I'm not expecting there to be an editorial function that Facebook is playing, but a filtering function. And I think that I don't think that function has been played well by that. And I think that has been deleterious to our democracy.
Thank you.
Long-winded answer.
No, that was great though, and an important topic that we always have to think about when we're talking about the news and we're talking about what we're consuming, how we're consuming it, and really what the future holds with that. Keeping an eye on time, because we do our best to end as close to 10 o'clock as possible. A number of things we didn't get a chance to cover. I want to briefly mention you also own a winery, right?
Well, we own land. We own land in Argentina in the Uco Valley. That's our wine. That's our rosé. We make a rosé, and we also make a Malbec blend. We make two different types of wine. The name is Rayo de Luz, which Monica is the Spanish expert, not me, but Rayo de Luz means ray of light, and ray of light in Kiran, my younger son's name, in Sanskrit means ray of light. Okay. And so that's how we got the name. And we own the land in, as I said, the Uco Valley, which is an hour north of Mendoza in Argentina. We were just there over the winter break. We bought the land, I guess now 6-7 years ago. We planted. Last year, we got our first vintage of wine. That we'll be getting our second vintage this year. So it's a fun project. I can't say it'll lead to my retirement, but it's certainly fun.
Is it easier than venture capital?
No, it's way harder than It's
It's
way
harder. So
harder to have
how
that.
does it rank between producing a hope to be Broadway show, venture capitalism, and
well, if you so the challenge in wine is really not the making it as much as it getting into this country. If you make it elsewhere, and then once you get in this country, distribution, because the laws for alcohol are really all harken back to prohibition. And the distribution system that exists, was set during prohibition. And so the system makes really no sense in kind of the modern world. But what's happened is you have entrenched levels of distribution at each level that earn excess rent by being there, and therefore have made it very difficult for those laws to get changed. So the hardest part about the wine business is actually, once you have wine, to actually be able to sell it to somebody in a way that makes any sense.
So what's the rank order?
I'm gonna say, as it relates to God, it's hard. The problem is both of them are loss-making ventures. Which is going to be a bigger loss-making venture is kind of hard to predict.
So that's interesting. One of the things we didn't get to talk about, I know that you're a voracious reader, and we had the book review section. How do you find time to read so much with everything else you're doing?
I think it's. I think if you talk to anybody who's been very successful in almost any pursuit, maybe not athletics, I don't know, but they're almost always a reader. And I just think it's incredibly important to have an open mind. It's incredibly important to be a continuous learner. And I kind of have a broad set of interests, and the best way for me to feed those interests is to continue to read. As it relates to how do I find time to read, two things. One, a very, very, very long time ago, when I was in fifth grade, I think, or fourth grade, my dad made me take a speed reading class.
Okay.
That was a great. At the time, I was annoyed having to take a speed reading class because it was not required by school.
There's the secret: speed reading.
And so that has definitely helped. And then the second thing is, I think it's the same thing. My experience is it's the same thing that people say with exercise, with reading. People will say to me, "Oh, I really don't have any time to read," or "I really don't have any time to exercise." And then I'll ask them, "What's the last Netflix show you watched?" And they'll tell me they binge watched some 5 seasons of XYZ. And I'm like, "Well, what's the last time you guys went out?" And like, "Well, I went out and went to such and such place and I did such and such thing." And I'm like, "Well, this is just a matter of choice." And I'm not certainly don't impose my views on other people, but I think, like in everything in life, if something's a priority, there's always time. And it's just
Ron Thomas and Laura Silverman definitely agree in terms of downtime is reading something, continuous learning. Laura Silverman couldn't agree more.
I also think that it's like, I read in cabs, I listen to podcasts. There's somewhere in the paper, I don't remember now what section it was. There was an article about when you take a day off, take a day off.
That's right.
That is what I am not good at that. I just most recently, my most recent book was Bill Burns, but the book before that was a book by Ryan Holiday on stillness. And it's a great book. I must say that stillness is not something that's a core competency for me. If I had to pick a weakness, it'd probably be stillness.
Doesn't sound like it.
Yeah.
And Julia shared a link to that article, What to Do with a Day Off.
Yeah, that's one that I have not mastered that one yet.
And of course we haven't gotten
here I am on a day off, and I'm doing a video cast. So
thank you, Deven, for your day off. Ron is talking about long flights as a good time to get a lot of reading done as well. I know you have a lot of long flights.
I do.
What I wanted to do, what we traditionally do, is we end with the poem. So I'm going to go ahead and read the poem and then say a word about our next week's guest before we bring this show to a close. So let me go ahead and switch again to the camera and see if I can do this seamlessly. And there we go. That should be good in terms of audio. So as we do every week, we end the show with the poem, the weekly poem. It's selected by Naomi Shihab Nye, who is the 2019-2021 Young People's Poet Laureate of the Poetry Foundation in Chicago. Sree always says that we should, the poem should be read by the author because they actually understand the cadence and the emphasis and the meaning behind the words. It should never be read cold, but we do it anyway. Because in a celebration of poetry, the description plays on words and tiny twists mean much in a poem. In Lean Against This Late Hour, his mesmerizing seventh collection of poems, Garris Abdul Malekian makes us wonder, what if we could put a period on an entire period? Turn a corner, change the tune, and who is that little disappearing girl we barely see? What world is she being given? Something calms in the simple repetition of a word or thought and the hopeful conviction of there will be. So here is Dark Period by Garris Abdul Malekian. In this line or the next one, there will be a period, an end to all the words. Within the stark frame of the window, tired silhouettes and the dark dress of a little girl growing distant, growing distant, growing distant. In the stark frame of the window, a dark period grows distant. A period that is the end to all the words. Garris Abdul Malekian lives in Tehran. His poem is translated by Ahmed Nadalizadeh and Idra Novi from the Persian in Lean Against This Late Hour, forthcoming by Penguin Books. He is the poetry editor of Chespa Publications and executive editor of publications at the Youth Poetry Office in Iran. So that is always a fun thing to do to end our show with.
Hey Neil, I have to. My aunt Molly, who you know,
yes, of course,
reminded me. She sent me a text while you were reading the poem. I think that she reminded me that I did quit something.
Oh, good for Molly. So
which I've forgotten. So because I used to suffer from migraines, and
yes.
I get them occasionally now, but nothing like the frequency before. And she had read an article. This goes back, I don't know, 10 years. She had read an article saying that aspartame is a migraine trigger. Maybe you should give up Diet Coke. And so I gave up Diet Coke, and I have to say that my headache frequency went down like 80 or 90%. So,
and that's
other than an occasional sip when I'm watching a movie. I actually don't drink soda at all, but I gave up Diet Coke and it had a very, very positive effect. So
you two are a quitter.
Reminding me about that.
You two are a quitter.
I too am a quitter.
I will say that's something that our family actually suffers from, migraines. It's something we call the Parekh headache. All of our uncles and many of our cousins, even Ketan had migraines when he was younger, right? Your son, which is incredible. So that's really good to know. Ron is just commenting, it was such a great show. Thanks for putting this together. Sonny Slaughter, phenomenal guest. Insight, empowering, informative. And thank you. Rose thanked us for reading the poem. And she also calls you a Renaissance man, Deven. So I don't know if you've had that before, but that is high praise.
I'll take it.
What I want to do is to give a preview of next week's show. We have let's see here. We'll bring off Deven off the screen for a moment and show that. Let's see here. Let me actually, let me upload it this way. Apologize for that. So I want to give a shout out to our next week's guest, Corey Cohen, who is going to be interesting. Oh, that's where it is. Let's see. Put it here. And we'll take Rose's comment off. So Corey Cohen is a animal behaviorist and trainer. Sree will be back to host next week. And we'll have Corey remotely from Pennsylvania. He has a company called Path of Friendship, which is a new way of changing our relationship with our four-legged friends. Sree actually did a Facebook Live with him a few years ago, and has a dog himself, Tara, as some people know. He makes cameos. She makes cameos on the show every now and then. So definitely encourage folks to join us next week, February 9th, for Corey Cohen, Path of Friendship. And with that, we will bring today's show to a close. I'll have Deven back on, and some of the final comments coming in. We have Jonathan Borstein is signing off, quitting. It's quitting the read along for the week, but we will be back next week. And Deborah Bernick, Parekh Power, doubled today. And we had a triple shot earlier in the morning when Emily was with us. So definitely want to thank you for joining us, Deven, and thank all our family for watching and sharing the show. And obviously Molly was watching, and she was texting you.
She was texting
in the background. So yeah. That's always great. And Julia is offering her thanks as well. Thank you specifically to our production team, Steve Taylor, managing things on LinkedIn, and Julia Weeks, who managed things on Facebook. You can follow them on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We all have consistent handles: Neil Parekh, Steve Derive, and Julia L. Weeks. Note the L in the middle. And we also want to do a shout out to our sponsor, Bombay Shirt Company, who supports all of Shree's conferences, his travel, and the New York Times read-along. And I think that Ron Thomas's quote is the best way to end it. This show is a learning opportunity, so many interesting guests. And Deven, you were great, so thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your production team, and it was a seamless experience, and good luck with the show next week.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.